Good evening, everybody, and happy International Women's Day to you all. My name is Katie Hayward. I'm Professor of Political Sociology here at Queen's in the School of Social Sciences, Education and Social Work. It's my pleasure to welcome you to Queen's for this event in our A22 Leaders Lecture Series. We're holding this series to give local party leaders an opportunity to set out their future vision for Northern Ireland in the run-up to the Assembly election in May, and to provide a platform for students, staff and members of the public to put questions to them. There are other events scheduled in the series, so please check the Queen's Public Engagement Events page for details, or follow us on social media at QUB Engagement. We'll be hearing very shortly from Michelle O'Neill, MLA, and those of you in the room will be given a chance to quiz her. This is what it says here, to quiz. And I will facilitate that as the chair. And there'll be a roving mic for that purpose. Those of you watching online can also put questions to Michelle using the Slido link from the live streaming page. So if you visit the engagement events page and follow the link to the live stream, you'll be able to submit questions that way. It's my pleasure now to welcome our speaker, Michelle O'Neill. Michelle is Vice President of Sinn Féin and MLA for Mid-Ulster. She was appointed Deputy First Minister and Joint Head of Government for the North in January 2020. Michelle was first elected in 2005 as a member of Dungannon and South Tyrone Council. In 2010, she became the first woman and one of the youngest to be elected as Mayor of the region. She was elected to the Assembly in 2007 and succeeded Michelle Gildennew as Minister for Agriculture and Rural Development in 2011 and later became Minister for Health after the 2016 election. In January 2017, after Martin McGuinness's resignation as Deputy First Minister, Michelle was chosen as Sinn Féin's new party leader in the North. She led the party's Assembly election campaign that followed, herself topping the poll in Mid-Ulster. And she also led Sinn Féin's campaign for the Westminster general election in 2017 and both the local government and European elections in 2019. In February 2018, Michelle became Vice President of Sinn Féin, succeeding Mary Lou MacDonald. And in January 2020, after New Decade, New Approach, she was appointed Deputy First Minister. A lot has happened in the 2 years since, including COVID and Brexit and the protocol and the resignation of two First Ministers. Michelle, we look forward very much to hearing what you have to say about this experience, but most particularly about your vision for the future after this upcoming election. I'd like to invite you now to the podium to deliver your Leaders Lecture. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Katie, for inviting me here to be for my quiz. It is a real pleasure to be back again in Queen's this evening for the Leaders Lecture. I was trying to reflect on how long it is since I was here the last time. I think it's about 3 years. So much has happened in between. But especially good to be here today, given the day that's in it. So happy International Women's Day to everyone. And the theme of my remarks this evening, Katie, are it's a time for real change. Fairness, diversity, compassion and hope. These are the things that bring us together and that make us stronger. I think this is our common ground. My priority is to make politics work and to show that real change is possible in making people's everyday lives better. That means strengthening our health service, giving our children a world-class education, building affordable homes, making communities safer, protecting our rural way of life, creating good jobs so that the next generation has a better future here. It means supporting workers and families struggling through this cost of living crisis, which is placing a heavy burden on so many households. People rightly want their politicians to work together to prioritise these very important things. And the past 2 years has shown that power sharing can work whenever all of those involved are invested and committed to it, with a unity of purpose and leadership. I couldn't speak tonight without referring to the horror that is unfolding with the unjustified invasion of Ukraine and the humanitarian crisis impacting many millions of families now fleeing to seek refuge across Europe. The military aggression by Russia to peace, security and the well-being of Ukraine is a global threat to all of us. It is a brutal attack on Ukrainian sovereignty, international law and on democracy. And it should serve to motivate politicians everywhere and at every level to redouble our efforts and demonstrate our commitment to building together a world where peace is preserved and not taken for granted, not least here, where it was hard won after decades of political conflict. In 4 weeks' time, we will mark the 24th anniversary of the signing of the Good Friday Agreement, our peace agreement, a cornerstone of the peace process. A peace agreement that has parity of esteem, equality and respect at its core. This anniversary allows us an opportunity to reflect upon how far we've come, but also from those dark and tragic days of conflict, but also to reflect on the journey that we have all been on, a transformative journey that we have all been on together. It allows us to take stock and assess the present realities which confront us in 2022, not least in the context of Brexit and its negative implications, which includes the threat to the institutions of the Good Friday Agreement itself. As of the 3rd of February, when the DUP First Minister Paul Givan resigned from office, our local executive can no longer meet to take decisions on behalf of the public that we serve. This follows the DUP's unlawful boycott of the North-South Ministerial Council meetings. The DUP boycott of the executive and the North-South Ministerial Council meetings amounts to an assault on the Good Friday Agreement itself. Boris Johnson has stayed silent on this, I think, which tells us everything we need to know about his interest in either our people, our place or our politics. This is a Prime Minister and a government who never has and never will prioritise the needs of the people here. At the heart of the problem is the DUP Tory hard Brexit. And I represent the Good Friday Agreement generation, and I make no apology for fiercely defending it. I've said on many occasions that Brexit and the Good Friday Agreement are incompatible. The solution to the Brexit problem is therefore clearly the protocol, which both sides negotiated, both sides recognised the necessity for, in order to take into account our unique circumstances, by avoiding a hard border on the island, by enabling the smooth functioning of the all-island economy, by safeguarding the Good Friday Agreement in all its dimensions, and ensuring continued access to the single market, but while also protecting its integrity. The protocol, whilst imperfect, does mitigate the North against the worst impacts of Brexit, and it is a fact that no credible alternative exists. The ongoing protocol talks must resolve the issues and arrive at a stable and a lasting solution which minimises disruption and checks, but which is done so within the framework of the protocol. The resolution to the medicines issue just before Christmas, I think, demonstrates that whenever real issues arise, that they can be addressed and solutions can be found. There's no problem that can't be solved. And there is also so much economic benefit to be yielded from the special status which we now enjoy, and this cannot be squandered. Unfortunately, political unionism has chosen to conflate identity politics with trade, which is not accepted by the majority of our people or businesses as a reasoned argument to oppose the protocol. The fallout from Brexit has caused detrimental tensions to British-Irish relations, especially after a decade of very important work between our islands around peace, reconciliation and renewed cooperation. It is high time that the present realities were honestly assessed and also understood. The all-island economy continues to flourish, and a number of recent reports highlights that. Imports from the north to south rose by 65%, while exports to the north rose by 54%. So that's good news. It's good news for the economy. It's good news for jobs, livelihoods, a new generation of young people. The forthcoming election on the 5th of May will return, in my opinion, a majority of MLAs who support the protocol, who recognises the international legal context and also who respect the rule of law. The British Secretary of State, Brandon Lewis, and his government have abandoned any pretence whatsoever of rigorous impartiality in discharging his duties. And we often hear the talk of the need for balance. But it is a one-sided balance sheet as far as I am concerned, when it comes to the attitude and approach of the NIO. The recent debacle around the double jobbing amendment from the NIO to the NIO legislation amounted to giving the DUP leader an each-way bet in the upcoming elections. He was able to retain his Westminster seat as he waited to see the outcome of the Assembly election. Now, pressure from all the other parties coming together, strongly rejecting that, meant that it was hastily withdrawn. The moves being made by the Tories to relocate civil service jobs to Belfast later this year, in my opinion, again smacks of a power grab from London. But it isn't just unique to us. This same approach is being applied in Scotland and in Wales, with repeated attempts to undermine the autonomy of devolved regions. The failure by London to see the peace process as an ongoing process, not just a point in time, required the continued active oversight and involvement of the two governments as co-guarantors, and that's part of the problem. Outstanding challenges remain and can't be ignored because they are an enormous fault line and must be confronted and addressed. This includes dealing with the legacy of the past, reconciliation and sectarianism, and also the delivery of rights. When the Assembly, Executive and North-South Ministerial Council were restored in January 2020, it was with that shared commitment to deliver the public services, societal reforms and the future that our people need and deserve. It was ambitious to form a five-party coalition executive, but it was achieved, getting us back to genuine power sharing, and thankfully so, because everyone knew that it would be challenging. The coalition would be challenging, but no one could have predicted that within a short number of weeks that we would be dealing with a global pandemic that would have such devastating impacts for so many people in every part of society. So it's to all credit to all ministers across the five parties in the executive that they all responded together, that they've worked with the unity of purpose, unity of leadership for the past 2 years. I think that's what the public want to see more of. It's that cooperation and it's that delivery. So to jeopardise and to destabilise the political system of government, to act unlawfully as ministers in office, to abandon the health service without any 3-year budget in place, and protest at the protocol amounts to serious political negligence by the DUP. When you put that into perspective of the international upheaval being witnessed and the domestic cost of living pressures, I think any reasonable assessment will judge the DUP walk out of government as belligerent and ill-judged. Jeffrey Donaldson has warned that it will be difficult for his party to re-enter the political institutions after the May election if the issues around the protocol are not resolved. And this is heard by those of us within nationalism as unionism doing democracy only on unionism's terms. So we hear day and daily, no protocol, no nationalist First Minister, no nationalist Justice Minister, no language rights, no abortion rights, no integrated education, no, nay, never. The facts are that the balance of power at Stormont has shifted irreversibly. We see this weekly whenever the DUP are the outlier as they attempt to vote down progressive legislation. So those that hanker for the past, those that wish to disrupt the present, who threaten our future, need to realise that there isn't any going back, there is only going forward. Sinn Féin will not be renegotiating the Good Friday Agreement or shifting any goalposts to satisfy regressive unionism before or after an election. This is now about those of us who want to work together, to make the Assembly, Executive and all island institutions work, to deliver on health, housing, education and jobs, to deliver social change and economic prosperity, taking advantage of our dual market access to the British and EU single markets. Sinn Féin have made health a priority. Finance Minister Conor Murphy has delivered £200 million to transform the health service and support healthcare workers, and is committed to making health the Executive's #1 spending priority for the next 3 years. We are committed to investing in health, tackling waiting lists and ensuring that you can see your GP whenever you need to. We need to protect the health service. We need to resist Tory underfunding and attempts to dismantle the NHS. Communities Minister Georgie Hargey will deliver the biggest shake-up of housing in the housing system for over 50 years, building 100,000 social and affordable homes. Sinn Féin is also working to improve the planning system for rural communities. We're strengthening workers' rights, introducing legislation to ban zero-hour contracts, and have supported paid leave to carers and to parents who have suffered bereavement. Conor Murphy has been made paying workers a living wage a requirement for any company to get a government contract. We want to build a fairer economy, a stronger economy, and we want to drive the potential of the all-island economy to improve the quality of jobs and raise incomes for workers north and south. The rise in living costs, we all know, is placing a huge burden on so many ordinary people. So our ministers will work every day to try to put money back in people's pockets. Sinn Féin have delivered the £200 energy payment to over 280,000 people. Deirdre Hargey has binned the bedroom tax to protect thousands of people from this cruel Tory tax. But there are financial limitations to what the executive can do, but we will continue to do all that we can. However, the British government does have the powers to take action, and they also must use them. We have called on them to scrap VAT on energy bills for the duration of the energy crisis. They need to introduce a windfall tax on energy generators, with the money being redirected to support families. They need to reverse the planned increase in national insurance, which is due to come in within a short number of weeks, and we know that's going to hit lower income workers and small businesses hardest. And they need to halt the planned change in the red diesel entitlement. I think the cost of living crisis highlights, the cost of living crisis highlights how the North is hampered by the limitations of devolution from Westminster. That being said, I see no contradiction whatsoever in declaring our firm commitment to power sharing, at the same time making the case for constitutional change on this island. I do genuinely believe we're in a decade of opportunity, and Sinn Féin will certainly not miss that moment. Last year marked the centenary of partition of Ireland by Britain. The historic relationship between our two islands has been characterised by colonialism, political division and partition itself. The political, economic and social consequences of this divided past continue to reverberate here in this day. While our past was divided, our future can certainly be shared. This must be our common ground. The GFA provides a peaceful, democratic path to achieving Irish unity, and attitudes are changing in the North. Fundamental demographic change is happening, and we know that there are those of a British identity beginning to think outside the contours of partition and the Northern state. I think the bigger question now for many is, which union do you wish to be part of? Given that back in 2017, the EU have announced that in the event of Irish unity, the island of Ireland will have an automatic route back to full EU membership. So the choice is a narrow, inward-looking Brexit Britain, or an outward-facing, inclusive, modern Ireland within the EU. The business community, the labour movement, eminent academics and think tanks have all begun to research and model constitutional and economic frameworks. The new Ireland that follows a successful unity referendum must be for everyone, regardless of creed, culture, ethnicity, tradition, identity or sexual orientation. The human rights and equality guarantees that are built into the Good Friday Agreement must be retained for all. Building the foundations for authentic reconciliation must be central to all that we do. This is the prize. This is the prize where our people live in harmony and friendship together. A lot of hurt and pain has been caused by us all towards each other during the last century. I'm sorry that that has been so. It is time to heal the wounds of the past in order to stop burdening today's generation and allow us to move forward together. I believe that Irish unity and reconciliation are inseparable. The new Ireland cannot and must not be the old Ireland. That is why the Irish Government should convene a National Citizens' Assembly on constitutional change to positively address the key policy areas and the mechanisms for change ahead of any future referendum. So coming towards an end of my contribution this evening, I want to say this. I think these are seminal times. British Government policy towards Ireland has run out of road. Acceptance of the right to Irish self-determination and full implementation of the Good Friday Agreement in all of its parts should be adopted within British Government policy. The two governments should agree a date for concurrent Irish unity referenda, North and South, in accordance with the agreement itself. Huge change is definitely on the horizon, and the global and national political landscape is moving rapidly. It is time for real change. It is time for big ideas. And most importantly, I think it's time for change that delivers on the ambitions for all of us who share this island. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Michelle. That was a super lecture in which you covered a vast amount of topics that will be of interest to everyone in the room and hopefully everybody watching online too. I will just get the Slido set up so I can relay their questions to you, but you covered the Good Friday Agreement, Brexit and the Protocol, power sharing, which I think was notable that you paid credit to all the ministers in showing unity of purpose at a critical time, public services including the health service, housing, precarious employment, the decade of opportunity, thank you Morris, Irish unity and the future referendum, and the fact that we're living in seminal times and this is time for big ideas. So thank you for that, and I look forward to hearing the questions. I'm going to take the opportunity to ask the first question myself.
Okay.
And it's in honour of the fact that this is International Women's Day. And I know you've been busy this week with that. And my question is, what achievement of the Assembly you'd be most proud of or consider most significant with regards to the advancement of gender equality? And the second part of the question is around Sinn Féin as a party and what you'd like to see change in the party to advance gender equality.
Thank you very much for that. And I have to say that quite often the Assembly is criticised for maybe lack of delivery, and this has been a very strange mandate. Obviously, RHI collapsed at the start of the mandate, and that meant that we had no government for 3 years. But for the last 2 years, since the political agreement was reached in January of 2020, I think that whenever the analysis is done, despite dealing with COVID, despite all the challenges that brought, there's been a huge amount of legislation that's been secured and actually got over the line. And it's a whole range of really fantastic pieces of legislation. And it actually has meant that in order to get to that point, there's been significant amount of cross-party working. And I think that's a really good and positive thing. That's why I was trying to draw that out in the theme. Quite often the headlines are about the division, whenever there's actually an awful lot more where parties actually work together. So when you look at even this mandate, everything from significant legislation around workers' rights, we've seen bills coming from Justice, from Naomi's department, for example, around domestic violence. We've had the launch from my own department around a violence against women and girls strategy. We've had paid parental leave in the event of a bereavement of a child. There's been so many family-friendly and women-friendly and tackling gender issues that needed to be addressed in this mandate. That's something that I think whenever we have a chance to sit down and reflect, we will say it was a good thing from the last 2 years. And workers' rights, particularly because obviously given women quite often find themselves in precarious employment, and we've been able to make a lot of advances. One of the pieces of legislation that won't probably get through because we've just a short number of weeks is Emma Sheeran's bill around gender budgeting, and that will make a huge difference whenever you bring that into play. So I think that I'm proud of what's been achieved in the last 2 years, and I don't just mean from our own party, I mean from everybody. And I look forward to the next mandate where I think there's a whole lot more to do. What needs to change? I think we all have to keep ourselves in check around what needs to change. We need to make politics a more welcoming place for women to come forward. It's a very challenging job at the best of times. It's confrontational at the best of times. And we need to make it accessible, and that can be everything from how we conduct ourselves. If I'm going to take the positive out of which I try to do in every situation, COVID's been so challenging, but I never heard of Zoom before COVID. And now we can connect with people, have a conversation that doesn't mean that doesn't necessitate even people having to leave their homes and travel to, from a rural area to Belfast or something like that. So there are new ways to communicate. I think that'll make it easier for women. And also, if you can't see, you can't be. I'm very proud that actually our party has over 50% of our female representation are female, so that's a a huge stride forward. That doesn't mean we get complacent. We have to keep doing whatever we can. I have a lot of our MLA team are young mothers, and the assembly hours are not very family friendly. So I think that one of the things that I would like us to look at in the new mandate are how do we make even where you come to do your business every day a more family friendly environment that allows more young women to come forward and means that they don't have to choose between having a family and also having a career in politics.
Thank you. Please put up your hand if you'd like to ask a question, and the mic will come to you. Yes.
Thanks very much, and you're very welcome here tonight. Nice to see you. You make on the unity question. You make a call for a citizens' assembly on the island, and that this should be instigated now by the Irish government. Would you not recognise that the approach to any negotiations, you don't start with end game, you start where you are? And I want to know, and I've asked this many times of folk who are aligned to your own groupings, as to why don't you invite those of a unionist persuasion to discussions on this, and clear and meaningful discussions. I don't mean something that is banal or that is entirely doctrinaire. And in fact, I suggest that if we ever hear about the discussions, they won't be properly valid, because you probably need to go quietly, or somebody needs to go quietly. Do you not think that's the way to begin? I'd love your views on that here. Thank you.
You take a number, or do you want to?
No, just...
Yeah, thanks very much for that. I don't think it's an either or. I think we can do both. I think that the fault line with the Brexit debate was that people were being asked to take a vote on something where perhaps they didn't have all the information in front of them. So I would much prefer we get to a point where we have a very reasoned, and we have a table that has all the information on it, and people can make that informed decision. So I would like us to start to talk about things like, what does the health service look like? What does an Irish National Health Service look like across the island? Because there are many areas which we don't do well north or south, and people have to leave these islands to travel elsewhere to get support. There's so many things that we could do better together. So when I talked earlier about the common ground, I think the common ground for all of us, regardless of what background you come from, what political ideology you have, is what we could share ground on wanting a good health service, better paid jobs. What keeps our young people wanting to stay here after they've studied. I think there's so many things that we could actually, where we should start, as opposed to starting with the emotional attachments to flags and emblems and anthems and all the other things. So certainly that's why I make the case that now is the time to plan. So I think it'll probably be multi-layered. That's why it's not either or. So you need to have the Citizens' Assembly, have those debates, encourage them to be as inclusive, because it's no good those of us that want to unite the country talking to each other about what we want. It needs to be for everybody. So how do you make it so that others will engage, perhaps those of a British identity, those that are not convinced and think that they've got a closed mind? Can we get those people into the room? Can we talk about what's important? And then alongside that, the work that you refer to around the private conversations, and that happens. I can tell you that happens. That's something that I actively am engaged in. I think COVID probably put a bit of a stop to to the kind of conversations that we were having. So I think there's many a conversation underway, but there's no good United Irelanders talking to themselves. It'll only work if we actually are inclusive and we actually engage everybody and we actually talk about what matters to everybody. What are your concerns? What are your hopes? What are your aspirations? What can we do better? Let's build a better future, because partition's failed everybody, not just those of us of a national identity. It's failed everybody. We're a society living in with sectarianism rife among us. We're a society that's been just divided and separated. That needs to change. So the prize for me is the something better.
Thank you. I have a question here on Slido that follows on from that. So this is from Dale. And he's saying, to achieve your goal of United Ireland, it's clear you'll need to engage with and gain support from unionists. What steps will you take now? Can you overcome centuries of division? And this is the key thing, I guess. Can you really engender trust with those, as he put it, have been your opponents for so long?
Okay. Well, I would say to that certainly I have political opponents, but I don't come at I don't come at the unity debate as having to convince opponents. I think I come at it of trying to build something better. I know that I have a role to play in convincing people, but I also equally accept that I don't own the debate. And more people are entering into the conversation, and I deem that a very healthy thing. And I think we all have to be confident enough to bring our own perspective, our own viewpoint, be big enough to listen to other viewpoints. But that's why we need to have the debate as inclusive as possible, because when you look at, I said about, there's many academics entering into the world, there are think tanks that are now into the conversation. There are many think tanks that are actually bringing forward, like, what does constitutional change, what does economic change look like? You have people like David McWilliams who have been, making the case for the economic benefits of unity, and he might convince someone that perhaps I'll not reach, but that's okay. That's okay. I think that's how we'll be successful, if we actually all come at it from our own personal beliefs, but then also our own expertise, and everybody will be convinced for different reasons. So why you will choose to vote for constitutional change may be different from me to you, or Donna in the front row, or anybody else. I think it's a really healthy thing if we can encourage the debate.
Can I push you a wee bit on the question of trust? Because it's an interesting word to use, and obviously there's a wider situation in which we find ourselves of people's growing doubt around democratic process and questioning information about decisions that are being made, and about government, etc. And so people's trust in politicians is obviously somewhat diminishing. How do you see that as a challenge, even aside from the particularities of the situation here, but how do you see that challenge of how you gain trust of voters and the general public?
Well, government has to be open and transparent, and you also have to bring in voices from outside of government. I'm a strong believer in civic participation. We need to have, that type of partnership approach around how we develop policies, and not like an end game, not a tick box at the end of a department deciding this is something that we should do. I would believe that you need to have that wider civic engagement. That was actually part of NDNA. It actually goes back as far as the Good Friday Agreement, and unfortunately some parties didn't like what they were hearing as part of the contributions that were made to some of the debates and the socio-economic issues that we needed to tackle. But I think if we're going to build trust, then politics needs to be open and transparent. We need to explain to people why we're doing things. We need to be honest to say what we can do and what we can't do. We need to probably communicate a lot more what is good. And there's a challenge in that, because good news stories don't sell news, but division does. And unfortunately, I think, as I described in my first contribution, as I am of the Good Friday Agreement generation. I think I represent the Good Friday Agreement generation. So politics is changing, personalities in politics is changing. Media needs to change. All things are, and even in media, things are changing also. So perhaps there's a bit of a generational shift, and as well as everything else about being open and transparent and ensuring that people can understand what you're doing.
Great, thanks, Michelle. Anybody else in the audience want to? Oh, yeah, lady at the front here. Thanks.
Hi, Michelle. My name is Emer Smith. I'm a master's student at Queen's, and I'm researching the right to self-determination in the Good Friday Agreement. I also work in immigration law at the minute, and it's sort of something that I've begun to become aware of through talking with colleagues, that refugees, migrants and asylum seekers aren't actually being engaged on this topic at all, really. And I'm just wondering what your viewpoint is on that, and if you, as a party or as an individual, have any strategies for engagement.
Thanks, Emer, and good luck with your studies. I think, and obviously the issue of refugees is more pertinent today, given just what's happening in Ukraine, and I'm sure everybody in the meeting would want to send solidarity to the people of Ukraine. And I have to say, the British government's approach to accepting refugees from Ukraine right now is absolutely woeful. It's disgraceful. It's actually quite disgusting, in my opinion. I think that we need to be very welcoming, very open, and have no barriers to people fleeing war when they need to come here. So we've done it before. Eamon, we've done it with the Syrian refugees. If you remember, we took a number of Syrian refugees and put a whole wraparound package around them, and there's an ongoing engagement with that cohort of individuals. But likewise, we need to do the same for the people of Ukraine right now, and anybody who is coming here as a refugee. Unfortunately, again, the limitations of devolution mean that we don't have this as a devolved power, and we're not able to set our own future and our own approach to things as perhaps we would want. But we'll continue to make the case that we need to be able to be as supportive as we can. Deirdre Hargey, who's the Communities Minister, has already put in train a number of areas of work that if, and I hope we do, over the course of the number of weeks we open our doors to more people from Ukraine, then we need to have the proper supports package in place. And that's everything from, not just arriving here, but it's a home, it's education, it's health, it's the whole wraparound that needs its integration into wider society. So there's a lot of good work going on within my own department in this area, but it's clear that we have a lot more to do, particularly given, I think, the scale of the crisis in Ukraine and what we can expect to need to do to support people in the coming weeks and months ahead.
Thank you, Michelle. I have another question on Slido relating to the situation in Ukraine, although it's about Ireland. Do you think Ireland should rethink its policy of neutrality in light of the events?
The simple answer is no. I mean, I think it's a fairly topical conversation right now, but I'm quite proud of Ireland's neutrality policy. It doesn't mean that it just means you're militarily neutral, it doesn't mean you're politically neutral. Our job is to, and I think we've got a very strong track record. We are, the promoters of peace, democracy, of diplomacy. We have been able to support so many people across the world because of our stance, and I think we need to maintain our stance. And I know others are, I think Fine Gael are being a bit opportunistic right now and using the situation in Ukraine to open up this debate, where that's not where I believe the people of Ireland are. It doesn't mean that you're weak, it doesn't mean that you're sitting back and not doing anything. We have pushed, particularly in the Ukrainian situation, we're pushing for the toughest possible sanctions. We're pushing for opening our doors to refugees. We are saying that we should be expelling those that are here as Putin's warmongers and propagandists. We're saying that we should be doing everything we possibly can on a humanitarian basis. That's sending aid, practical aid, financial aid, all those things. But I think that our neutrality position is where we should be.
Do you think there's any tension between that and then the expanding capacity of the EU with respect to, I wouldn't say militarisation, but growing capacity in that area? Because Sinn Féin was obviously traditionally very critical of that, and now we've seen huge advances that we wouldn't have even anticipated.
Yeah, but I think the EU strength has to be in promotion of the rule of law. It should be about democracy. It should be about that. It shouldn't be about. It was never envisaged that it was going to be about a military response. So I think that, again, in any circumstance, you're always going to have people who are going to be opportunistic and think this is the time to push for a European army, for example. I mean, that's not where we should be. What we should be doing now is putting the strongest possible pressures through all the mechanisms that I've just said around making it so difficult, the strongest possible sanctions to make it so difficult for Putin and his regime, and ensuring that we do everything we can from a diplomatic point of view to encourage dialogue, humanitarian aid, all those other things I think is where we should be focused, as opposed to thinking about European armies or NATO, and obviously the big debate around NATO and no-fly zones and all those things. We have to be very careful that we don't make a tragic and horrific situation worse.
Thank you. You had a question, didn't you? Yeah, I'll just wait for the mic and then...
Hi, Michelle. I'm a student here at Queen's as well, like Emer. Queen's University recently announced they're increasing the price of rents for students. Oftentimes maintenance loans for students don't even cover rents, never mind the cost of living, given the fact gas prices are rising and things like that. Are there any policies that Sinn Féin are proposing at the upcoming election to mitigate the cost of living crisis for students?
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for that. And it's been such a difficult time for students across the board. The last 2 years have been hard for everybody, but in particular for students because, you know, the move to online learning in the main, so many people caught having had taken up or signed up to contracts for accommodation, which they then weren't even there for, but still being forced to pay for it. We pushed the whole way through for financial support for students, and I'm glad that we were able to do that somewhat, but anything we did through the pandemic was always about trying to mitigate as best you can. You couldn't ever replace everything that people were losing out on. So we have pushed for support systems for students. We actually had to push quite significantly the economy department to actually put the funding in place, but I'm glad to say that we did eventually get there. When it comes to the cost of, like, it's a hard enough time. People are struggling enough with the cost of living, heating homes. As a student, you're barely getting by on any heating if you had heating at all. And for rents to be increased then on top of all of that, it's going to make it even more challenging. So, of course, we wouldn't support that. And just to say on student fees, because one of the things that was discussed recently, again from the economy department, was that perhaps they had to look at increasing student fees. That Sinn Féin will be very clear and in black and white terms to say that we will not support a hike in student fees. We don't believe that students should have to pay for their education in the first place. Unfortunately, given the limitations of the executive and our ability to set our own destiny in terms of fiscal powers, that's not within our gift, but we will work really hard. Sorry, not even more than that. We will ensure that there is no hike in student fees for any of the students, just given everything that we've been through, but also just because we believe in that.
Thank you very much. Yes, question at the front here.
Thanks very much, Michelle. Stuart Elgorn, I'm a member of staff at Queen's, and really in the back of the last question I want to ask you a bit about education, which perhaps being in this establishment will be no surprise. After health, our education system has many challenges. Integrated education is being discussed today even, and we've really made little progress in integrating our education system, which may be one of the fundamental challenges for Northern Ireland, Ireland and these islands over the next while. With a post-primary system where some do well in grammar schools and others are perhaps underserved in the other schools. And we have a university system where we're exporting large numbers of our young people to other parts of these islands, many of whom never come back. On some of those issues, what is Sinn Féin's overall approach going to be to ensuring we've got an education system fit for the future, whichever administration that we're working in?
Thank you. I suppose a couple of things just to say. I don't know whether I misheard you or if you said some young people are educated in grammar schools and some are educated in other schools. And I don't know if you said it wasn't as good in education, because I would dispute that.
They may not have the same opportunities.
Same opportunities, okay. Yeah. So I think there's a big believer in parental choice in the first instance, so we should be supporting parents to be able to make the right decisions for their children based on what they deem as appropriate. I think the Integrated Education Bill is a really good example of doing a really positive thing, and again, there was a lot of cross-party work went into getting that to the point that it's at today. However, we know that the DUP are potentially going to petition a concern it, which will be the first time the petition of concern has been used in the last 2 years, which is not a good example of government. But they have indicated that they will petition a concern that piece of legislation, which is so disappointing given that it would have meant that more parental choice, more support for integrated education, more support to allow us to ensure that every parent has access to send their child to an integrated school if they wish, so it's in your locality. We'll have to wait and see how that goes, but I've no doubt that if it doesn't get through in this mandate, we're coming back to it in the next mandate, and perhaps it'll even be more fulsome. I don't know, but certainly there'll be an attempt, it will come back to the next mandate if it is petition of concern. Now, I think in education in general, there's a lot of conversation around are we training are we encouraging young people into training or education that is relevant to society? So we have a lot of skills gaps. So are we doing enough in terms of development, career development, encouraging young people to go in the right direction? We have a huge skills gap here, which we need to address. I think that's probably up there in terms of where we need to go with the economic changes that we need, but the skills gap needs to be addressed, and that's been caused by, there's a whole lot of challenges there, the loss of EU funding, which is going to be, I'm sure, a big issue for the university as well. The new policies in terms of migration from the British government, which again means our access to the labour market is, to those, some in the labour market, is going to be even more challenging. So I think that we need a review of education, training. We need a new economic strategy that allows us to actually point things in the right direction. We need fresh leadership of the economy, is my other viewpoint. And I think that what I would like us to develop is a more fair, sustainable, affordable system of education that is collaboration between further education, higher education, all coming together. There's an awful lot more that we could do together, I think. So it'll not be just one thing, there'll be many things, but leadership of the economic department, I think, is a key driver of steering things in the right direction in the next mandate.
Okay, I will just ask one question from Slido before going back out to the audience here. This is from Anonymous, but some good questions. So this question is, what is Sinn Féin's view on reforming mandatory coalitions and allowing parties to form their own voluntary coalitions now there's no overall Green or Orange majorities in the Assembly?
So, I mean, again, when I made the point earlier on around that we'll not be renegotiating the Good Friday Agreement, I stick by that point. We have a Good Friday Agreement and a peace agreement for a reason. We had a northern state built on discrimination. We had sectarianism and division, and the reason we have our system of governance is it's there for a reason. And I will fight to protect that. I think that we just need to learn to work together. I mean, we have a unique style of government here. We do need all parties around the executive table. I think that is really important. I think previously, whenever other parties walked away from power sharing, I don't think it served the public well, because there isn't really an opposition here. It doesn't work like that. It's not like a normal system of governance. It's not the Dáil, or it's not Westminster. It's not a parliament of that sort. So I believe in defending the system of governance that we have, albeit challenging. No doubt it's challenging, but when it's at its best, it's really, really good. Obviously, also when it's at its worst, it's also bad. So I think we have to roll with that. But no, I support the system as it is.
I'm curious to hear you say that so clearly, given that you've had to step down as Deputy First Minister not once but twice as a consequence of a DUP party decision. How has that affected your views around? I mean, has that not affected your views on the mandatory coalition?
It doesn't, because I don't have the luxury to cherry pick the parts of the agreement that I wish to work. Either you are faithful to the agreement or you're not. There was a lot of blood, sweat and tears went into reaching the agreement. It's a compromise by many, and it was a necessity of its day. It's our alternative. It was the alternative to conflict. So I believe that we have to defend it, and we can't start to unravel and unpick what was achieved. I think we just need to agree that we need to share power together. At the same time, the natural outworking of the Good Friday Agreement is the conversation around the unity debate that's built into the Good Friday Agreement, that whenever the people here decide constitutional change will come about, then that's what will be the case. So I don't see any contradiction in being engaged every day in power sharing, playing my part in that, but then also having the conversation around constitutional change.
Okay, thanks. We had some more questions in the audience. Yes, maybe the young guy, yep. You don't mind me saying that, I'm sure.
Hello, Michelle. You've talked a lot about living the wounds of the past and the need to tackle legacy issues. However, many people, including myself as a nationalist, are alarmed by the continued glorification of the IRA, as exemplified by the incident in Clonmel a few weeks ago. So my question is, how do you heal the wounds of the past, considering your party's past association and continued commemoration of IRA terrorists?
So I think where I would start is that you and I have a job of work to do. to work together to build a better future. And I think you have to recognise, you see, that we all have different narratives of the past. And until you recognise that, we'll never be able to heal or move forward. So a compulsory part of actually us being able to reconcile is actually to understand that my lived experience and that of a nationalist people and a lot of Republican people is a very different perspective than those of different backgrounds or come at it from a different point of view. So you have to recognise that we might never agree on the past. But if you look at even in the last number of months, we've had report after report. This is my perspective of the world. Report after report has confirmed that the British government colluded with loyalist death squads to kill Irish citizens. That's my lived experience. That's my family's lived experience. That's the lived experience of far too many families that have lost a loved one over the course of recent decades. So I see it as, and what's written into the Good Friday Agreement, we all have a right to remember our dead. We all have a right to stand with families. It doesn't matter who you are, what background you come from. Everybody has a right to remember their dead. And I think we need to be respectful of each other and be big enough to understand that we don't have to agree on the past, but we should agree on this, that we must deal with it, that we must deal with the past properly so that you and your generation don't have to carry that burden into the future. The only way we'll ever have a reconciled people is actually if we deal with the past. And the British government are attempting to bring forward an amnesty, to throw away all the work that was done to try to find mechanisms in which to deal with the past. How does that help us? How does that help us ever move forward? Because the conflict and the impact of conflict is intergenerational. And we know this. We know that those that lost loved ones 40 years ago, their families are still campaigning for truth today. And it's just not acceptable. I don't want that for the generation of today. I want to do everything we can to heal the wounds of the past. And I would say this to you, you know, every mummy that has lost or buried a child throughout the conflict, they deserve support. They deserve support, and I will stand with that mummy, because I think every mummy's pain is the same, every tear dropped is the same. So let's work together to ensure that we properly deal with the past, that we build a better future, that we understand that we all have different backgrounds, and that it's okay that we're not going to agree on it. But I tell you what, there's a better journey ahead of us, I think.
Thanks. Yep, there's one more question in the audience.
Hi Michelle, good to see you in person again. Tom Sullivan, Chartered Society of Physiotherapy. It's very welcome that Minister Murphy is prioritising health in his draft budget, and that money is sorely needed. But it's also not necessarily all about money, it's about how services will be delivered in the future and where they're going to be delivered. The Chartered Society of Physiotherapy is part of a community rehabilitation alliance here, which brings together clinicians, third sector organisations, community organisations, to campaign for a right to rehabilitation for people here when they need it and where they need it. Can you give a commitment that come the next discussions on the programme for government, that Sinn Féin will give serious consideration to including a right to rehabilitation for people in the next programme for government, and similar to what has happened in Scotland, look to create a regional advisory board on rehabilitation to bring together clinicians, community organisations, local government, to look at how those community rehabilitation services can be delivered for the people who need them.
Thanks, Tom. And as you've rightly acknowledged, that Conor Murphy, the Finance Minister, had prioritised health in the budget because we have so many challenges to face, but if we don't fix our health service, it's impacting, it's diabolical, as we knew. It was so bad prior to COVID, and COVID isn't the reason why the health service is on its knees. It's exacerbated an already very difficult situation, and our health service staff are in crisis. You know this, you represent them, and they're under huge pressure, and the last 2 years has just been so difficult on so many fronts. We want to prioritise the health budget because we believe, and it isn't all about money, I absolutely agree with you, but you do need money to do certain things. You need money to transform the system, and as allied health professionals have always been very clear, there's a lot of things that you would do that would save the health service a lot of money if there was actually just the right investment in the right direction. So yes, you'll have my commitment to work with you to ensure that we can try to bring forward a rehabilitation or the right to rehabilitation. And I think that the programme for government allowed us for the first time in many a year the opportunity to come at things from a cross-departmental basis, because it was about outcomes. It's about, you know, how we can improve people's lives. So I think that there's huge opportunity, Tom, under the New Style programme for government to look at how we can do things better. But I believe in the right to rehabilitation. I believe in rights across the board. I believe in a Bill of Rights. I believe in enshrining people's rights so that nobody can be left behind. And certainly that's the determination that I and my team will bring every day to our work in the Assembly and the Executive.
Thank you, Michelle. Just time for one more question. I'll take it from the online audience. So you mentioned at the end we're living in seminal times, and of the many crises we face, perhaps the biggest one is the climate crisis. For those concerned with this, particularly of the younger generation, why should they vote for Sinn Féin rather than, say, the Greens or Alliance?
So the climate crisis is the big crisis of today, and you know, I think that obviously Sinn Féin are committed to net zero by 2050. We have worked with other parties in the Executive to try to bring forward a bill. Unfortunately, the DUP, despite being urged repeatedly by the other parties, refused to bring forward a climate change bill. And then we had the coalition of all the other parties working together to bring forward a bill that came forward in the name of Claire Bailey. And we supported that bill initially, but that forced then the Agriculture Minister to bring forward an executive bill, which I believe that we have now amended actually to make it a more fair bill. It still reaches our 2050 target, but also it's about a fair and just transition. How do you ensure that the lowest paid worker, the lowest income business isn't carrying the can in the same way which a larger income business can do? So we're saying a just and fair transition. We all have personal responsibility around, obviously, climate, but also we have a lot of corporate responsibility. I think this bill is going to make a huge difference, and Sinn Féin will prioritise this legislation getting through in the remainder of the mandate. I think we have made it a fairer piece of legislation, particularly taking into account the needs of rural communities, because unfortunately the climate change legislation got distilled down into farmers versus climate, whenever that's not the case. Farmers are actually part of the solution and want to play their part. There is a wider ask of all different sectors, all different industries, and it needs to be fair and just. So we have made amendments to that legislation we think that will actually make a real difference.
Great, thank you very much, Michelle. So it's time to conclude now. I will just remind the audience that if you found this event stimulating, which I'm sure they have, there are more lectures in the series coming up. Please keep an eye on Queen's public engagement social media feeds for details. The next Leaders Lecture will be delivered tomorrow, actually, by another female party leader, Naomi Long. So to close, I want to thank the organisers of this event. I want to thank the audience here in person and online, and most particularly I want to thank you, Michelle, for a very fascinating lecture and for answering all our questions so succinctly.
Thank you.